Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me this lunchtime. It is very much appreciated for you to spend your time with me today. Now, we are going to go through a presentation together. We're going to look a bit about safety culture. And if you do have any questions at all as we are going through, then please just pop them in the chat and we will come to those at the end, because I'm sure if any of you have been with me before or have met before, you'll know I quite like questions and I encourage curiosity. In fact, I think I talk about that as we go through. So please just put your questions in the chat there and we will come to those at the end. So again, thank you for joining me. We're going to talk about safety culture and how we might improve that within our business, within our organization, without it actually costing anything. That's the aim, that's the goal, because we don't want it to be costing us anything. A lot of organizations that I talk to, well, they do invest in systems, and I talk to them and they have training matrices and they have their ISO certificates up so they can demonstrate that everybody's compliant and everything's going well and everything is looking strong as it should be. But what we often find is culture varies quite massively between not only different businesses and different organizations, but even between different divisions of organizations as well. So I'm Heather. Thank you very much for joining. I work with many organizations and I'm a bit of a safety geek. I'm just going to throw that out there. So I specialize mainly in safety management systems and accident investigations. And both of those things often lead me into conversations with companies around safety culture. So when I speak to these organizations and these companies, they often think everything's going very well. Their dashboards, their reporting every month is green. So there's nothing really to worry about. And they'll tell me, yeah, we've invested in this campaign and we've done this and it's been brilliant. So we see that everything looks like it should be all shiny and all well. Now, we assume that by having systems in place, by having our ISO certificates, by having training in place, then we're in a good place. We're in a good position. And I have to say, yes, these things do matter greatly. I am not dismissing them out of hand, but they're not what's going to shift day-to-day behavior within a business. Now, we can invest in things such as the HSE Safety Climate Tool, and there is the Safety Culture Maturity Matrix, a catchy title that's produced by the Keel Centre, and they are great. I have to say, I am fans of both, and I have used both, and they do very much have their place. And they can help us to quantify, if you want to, the culture within our organisation. They can help us track improvements in that way and create us another dashboard. So they are very valuable tools, and they are very, very useful in helping us in some aspects. And I have used these. But I'm not going to talk about those today. That's not why I'm here. That's not what we're going to focus on today. So, we're not going to spend our time focusing on software and tools and programs and initiatives. Yes, they matter, but I want to really talk about the changes that we can make, the moments, the shifts that we can make in behavior on a day-to-day basis. So that's what we're really going to focus on in this session. Now, when we think about safety culture, and believe me, I have sat in rooms where people have rolled their eyes at me or thought, well, that's a very wishy-washy topic to be touching on because it's not very tangible. But it's how we work. So it's how we make decisions on a day-to-day basis, how we actually do things. So how we work when no one is watching. What decision do we make? Do we take a shortcut? Do we miss something? So it's how we do things day to day. So if we think about a couple of examples, so I'll give you a couple of examples and we'll take these through our session with us today as well. So we'll look at two teams. We've got two separate teams. So we've got one team. They are working towards a very important deadline. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be a report or a submission or a client deliverable. And the timeline is tight, but it's manageable. But then perhaps something slips. Maybe there was a delay earlier in the process, and that means the final stage is now under pressure. Now, what that team does next is going to be very much decided by what culture that they're working in. So let's think about a more practical team. So let's think about a maintenance team, for example. So maybe we have a site that's preparing for a planned maintenance shutdown. And it's been scheduled for weeks. The contractors are lined up, we've considered the production impact, we've thought about all the timelines. But then as that date approaches for that shutdown, well, there's a pressure starting to build because taking that system offline is going to be costly and it's going to affect output. So in that maintenance team, there's this growing sense that actually maybe we should delay this project or should we push through? And again, depending on the culture within that organization, that's going to really impact on what decision comes next on how we actually manage that. Now, investment isn't necessarily going to help either of those decisions. The culture is going to be developed by what leadership notice, what they respond to, what are they allowing to be tolerated. So it's coming from everyday decisions. It's not coming from new policies. It's coming from what's lived, what gets challenged, what gets ignored, and what is being normalized. So again, as I mentioned, often when I talk to organizations, maybe the board level or the senior leadership team, they'll think that it's perhaps really positive because what they're being fed in their reports, in their dashboards, for example, is perhaps it's green, all is well. But if we actually step back, or if we've had an incident that forces us to have a look, then we look at how decisions are being made in those teams, and we can see that they are being made under pressure, and we look at how they're really working and what decisions they're really taking. That's going to give us much more visibility, and that's going to really show us what's going on under the hood, really. What is our culture looking like? Now, if we think about risk and how we define risk, we can drift into it. Organizations can drift slowly and quietly into risk. So if you think about a task that took longer than expected, but then they find a quicker way to get it done. Just this once, quicker way, just this once, and it works and nothing goes wrong, and everybody says brilliant, and everyone thinks, yeah, we got through that. But then what we find is the next time, well, we just repeat what we just did. We do exactly the same thing. So eventually that workaround has actually become, well, it's just how we do things. That's how we do it. And nobody's really noticed that there's been a subtle shift, there's been a change, there's been a moment. So while output is still being delivered, the leadership team, perhaps, or the board level, they're not getting the signals that anything is actually wrong. So they think everything is going well. There's no signal, there's nothing to suggest anything is awry. So it loses its urgency. So let's think about a ship that is steering slightly off course. If the shift is small, you don't notice it straight away. Perhaps the sea still looks calm and the compass is very barely moving. But over time, well, that tiny change in direction is going to take you miles away from where you thought you were heading. And this is how organizations are working. They're drifting in exactly the same way with very small adjustments and very undramatic and reasonable decisions being taken until eventually the system is actually operating very different from where the leadership believes it is. But the leadership really has to delve down into what's going on to send a message that things don't need to be this way. We don't need to be making these small, unreasonable decisions. We don't want a workaround to become normal or a delay to become acceptable or a shortcut becoming routine. Because nobody wakes up, do they, and thinks, I'm going to take more risk. Nobody's deciding to take more risk. Everybody's just trying to get the job done. That could be to meet that deadline, to keep things moving. But it's just over time, the more we do that, the work is shifting slightly to make it possible. So if you think back to that team that had that client deliverable, they had that tight deadline and they had that pressure at the final stage. Now they made a few checks. The few checks were shortened. So instead of it being reviewed twice, perhaps it was only reviewed once. That doesn't seem major. A small adjustment that kept things moving. Or think back to that maintenance team who take the decision they're going to push that shutdown back. Not majorly, just a little, just a short delay. So the system's still running. Nothing's necessarily failed in that moment. So it feels like a reasonable decision was made. But again, what's happened is actually quite subtle. So the boundary has shifted, and because nothing goes wrong, well, that shift has actually it's felt quite safe. People are adapting to the pressure. So people start perhaps working later. Maybe they're taking shorter lunch times, or maybe even missing their lunch times. Maybe they're replying to emails at 10 p.m. These things sort of raise a few flags. So they're adjusting to this pressure to meet those deadlines, to get those targets. So in that maintenance example, the team on the ground, they understand the situation. They do know there was a reason there was a shutdown planned, but they don't want to impact the production and the cost expectations. They understand that pressure, so they're adapting. Yes, they might monitor more closely, they work around small issues, and they keep things going. Or maybe that team that had the client deadline, well, next time that similar situation comes up, the team is going to remember we managed this last time, so they're going to start from a slightly adjusted position, not the original one. So people are always adapting to this pressure. Now, as I said, nobody wakes up and decides to take more risk. They are just trying to get the job done. So culture isn't just going to magically change when we're saying to people, need to care more. We have to demonstrate that. It needs the environment around it to change. And that's really going to need small, consistent signals from leadership. Campaigns, yep, I've said they have their place, but they're supporting what we should be doing already. So having a campaign, like an organization said to me last month, we did slips and trips last month. So culture's great. Well, yeah, I applaud that we are doing safety campaigns, but they're the supporting act. They're not going to magically change things overnight. We need that to come from the leadership teams, from the management, from the team leaders. We need those small, consistent signals from the top. I think a good example of that recently was I was on a site and I'd asked one of the team leaders why they hadn't done some critical safety checks. Why haven't you done these critical safety checks? And their response in not so polite terms was when the when the management tell me off for not doing the checks instead of not telling me off for getting the product out the door, then I might do my checks. And I think you can agree that in that 10 seconds, the whole perception of what that safety culture was changed and it became very, very visible. I don't think he put it in as polite terms, but it did demonstrate very clearly in that moment that was where the signals were. They weren't on doing those safety checks. They were on production, they were on output. So it's really important that leaders take the time to notice, leadership takes the time to notice. If we're only reacting to the outcomes, then the people are only going to focus on the outputs. But if we notice what's going on in the process, and if we notice warning signals early on, then we're going to start shifting that behavior. So perhaps a team raises a concern early, it's acknowledged, it's explored, it's valued. And then next time, well, they'll speak up sooner. That's a win. But if a leader, if a team leader, if a manager, if a director only asks about the production, the output, the deadlines, well, people are going to learn very quickly that that's the bit that matters. Not because that's what they've explicitly been told, but because that's what they're experiencing day to day. That's the questions that they're getting. So think back to that team that was under pressure with the client deadline. From a leadership point of view, from a board level point of view, was it really visible that there was an issue? Because the deadline was met, the work was delivered. So the signal they're getting at the top was, well, actually, that worked. So there isn't a problem. And the same for the maintenance team as well. So at leadership level, what was really visible? What they can see as leadership, as board level, is, well, the system's still running, output has been maintained. So again, that signal that they're receiving is, well, it's working. They're not getting the signal that there was extra effort, there was small adjustments being made, there was stretch in the system. So, as leadership teams, as boards, we have to take the time to notice. We have to take that time to think about what is being shared with them, what is being fed up, what is the reaction so that these things, these concerns do get raised. We also have to think about the response that is being given as well. So, if we have the response, let's go with response A. So, you might get the response of, well, why wasn't it escalated sooner? That's not going to be as welcoming as perhaps response B, which could be good that we're seeing this now, so let's understand it. Curiosity. Same issue, but a completely different cultural outcome. So that team that was under pressure, or the maintenance team, if somebody had raised a concern, not necessarily a major alarm or a big flag, but just a sense that things were getting tighter, well, the leadership team would have had that ability, would have had that time to respond and say, okay, why is this? We can question it. We can ask some questions. What we don't want the response to be is, well, we've managed so far, so let's just keep it under review. It's something that we hear all the time, isn't it? I'm sure you're nodding along there thinking, oh gosh, yeah, I've heard that line a lot. We've managed so far, so let's keep it under review. Reasonable, but the message is let's just keep things going. Let's keep things moving. Let's move on. That's the message that's really being received from that. And leaders they don't need to say something for it to be acceptable. If there's something that's been repeatedly happening, something's happening repeatedly, but nothing changes, well, then that's something that's been tolerated. People assume that that's acceptable because it's being tolerated. It becomes the standard. So for the maintenance team, that delay becomes accepted. The system continues to run outside its original plan that we needed to shut down for. And because it continues to work, well, that new position has become normal. For that team that was under pressure, they had to deliver for that client, that deliverable or that report, that deadline. Over time, that extra pressure they've put themselves under, that working late, that missing lunch, those less checks, that's just become the norm. Not because anybody designed it that way, but because it worked and because, well, it was accepted. Culture really is shaped by what happens in small moments. It's not created through it's not created through audits and presentations, but the moments and how we can shift those. We don't want to be in a position where people stop pointing things out because they think direction is clear and experience has shown them what to expect or what happens when they do point something out. So, in the case of the team that had that client deliverable, I keep coming back to them, they had that report to deliver. Nothing went wrong that time. And the time after that, nothing goes wrong, and nothing goes wrong the time after that, which makes it even harder to see that anything has changed. But the standard has very much shifted, and it's shifted quietly. For the maintenance team, though, well, perhaps something does eventually happen. Not horrendous, not catastrophic. Let's not be grim on a lunchtime, but enough to prompt the question of, well, how did we get here? And when you look back, there wasn't a single decision that led there, but a series of small and reasonable steps, a series of moments. Now, moments don't require budget, but they do require us to shift. They do require some awareness. They do require leadership and management teams to take note. If you think of those examples we just looked at, new initiatives, new training, new poster campaigns, that wouldn't have changed anything we discussed, wouldn't have changed those examples. Nothing required the budget. What would have changed things was what was noticed. How was it responded to? Were early warnings, early discussions, early signals, were they taken seriously? And there are practical shifts we can make. So there are things we can do to improve our safety culture without spending anything. So we can change the questions that we ask. So instead of, are we compliant? We want to think about, okay, what feels difficult in the work right now? If you think about when we ask, are we compliant? We're going to get a very different answer from that second question. The first question of, are we compliant, is just checking the status. But that second question of what feels difficult in the work right now, that's the one that's really going to reveal what's happening, what's the reality on the ground. And we need to make it safe for people to speak early. So don't punish early signals, don't dismiss concerns. Ask questions, make it safe for them to speak early. Have those conversations and be visible in the work as well. Make sure that we're out there, we can be seen, we're visible in the work, not just the outcomes, not just when something's gone wrong or not when we're getting an audit report or we're seeing the dashboards, but in normal, everyday work, when nothing obvious is happening at all, when people are doing the everyday tasks and making everyday decisions, think about, can you see pressure? Can you see workarounds being introduced which wouldn't get fed up in those dashboards and the reporting? And I'm not saying you have to change how you work completely. Yes, we all have huge to-do lists and calendars full of meetings, and we're all under pressure and we've all got deadlines. But take a step back and think about one thing you can do differently. If I think about some of the organisations I've seen with the best safety cultures, if I think back to some of the best leaders I've seen, I can think of how they made themselves visible. And when I was putting these slides together the other day, I was thinking about this and I was thinking, actually, I can think of one very clear example on a manufacturing site where the CEO, before he even went to his office, before he even went to his desk or had his coffee, he'd get out of his car and he would actually walk through the whole of the manufacturing site, having a chat with those on the early shift. Nothing serious, just being visible. Just because that's how you're going to build the trust. That's how you're going to show that you are there, you are approachable, you will hear what's being said to you. So be visible all the way through. Otherwise, things will get hidden. You don't want people to be wary. And respond consistently. Consistency builds trust, and well, inconsistency destroys it pretty quickly. If you think about it, people don't judge culture on what's happening just once. They're judging it on what is happening repeatedly, what's being tolerated, what's being accepted. People already know where the risks are. Those that are doing the activities, those that are doing the jobs. In most businesses, in most organizations, the people closest to the work, well, they can already see where things are starting to stretch. But it's whether that information is traveling. Are people believing that it's worth speaking up? So if somebody raises something to their team leader, does the team leader then raise it up to their manager? Does it get fed up in the reporting, the monthly reports? Or are we just seeing a whole traffic light system of green when we're feeding up our reports? To be fair, I'm more alarmed when I do see all green. I'd rather see some ambers, some actions, some concerns being fed up, because it demonstrates that actually the system is working. Safety is all about continuous improvement. any management system is all about continuous improvement with our plan, do, check, act. So is it working? Are people speaking up? Are people actually reporting what needs to be reporting? Silence isn't happening because people don't care. But I have heard people say things like, well, I've raised it before and nothing happened. Or actually, it just created a bit more hassle for me, so I don't bother now. And you do hear those things. So over time, that's people that are making a judgment about whether it is going to be worth saying anything, whether they should be speaking up, or whether they should just be putting their heads down and getting on and thinking everything's going to be okay. So culture isn't created by policy. It is genuinely created by behavior, especially from the leadership teams, the management teams. It comes from the top. So we can improve culture without spending a penny. We can pay attention differently. We can respond differently. We can ask more questions. Be curious. That is such a underrated, perhaps, commodity or professional skill curiosity. I think I read somewhere the other day that said that our innate sense of curiosity is beaten out of us by the time that we're 30. I thought that was very sad. So if you do anything, challenge yourselves this week to just be more curious in life, ask questions and notice things that are going on around you. What's one thing that you're going to do differently this afternoon? Not after your next board meeting or next month, but your next conversation this afternoon or your next meeting or the next decision that you make. What might you do differently? What might be that moment that makes that shift? It doesn't change when you invest more. It changes when you see more, when you hear more, listen more. So yes, we can use those tools that are available to us. We can use those to monitor. They're very useful sometimes if we need to use them as proof, as evidence that, culture does need to improve perhaps. So yes, use the HC safety climate tool, use the Keel safety culture matrix. They are great, but they're not the things that are going to change the culture. They're going to give us an overview. They might point us in the right direction. They might give us something we can flag on a dashboard or a board report. But it's those small moments, those changes, that curiosity, that openness that's going to really shift that culture in an organization. So think about what you're going to do this afternoon when you make your next decision. If you want any further insight into any of those points that I've raised, because I feel that was rather a whistle-stop tour of safety culture without spending anything. And I hope it has resonated as well. But, I do delve into all of those topics even deeper, which you can find on YouTube on a weekly basis. And also, as Abby, we do work to support organisations who are looking to have that little bit of extra support as well. But I'd be really interested now to have a look and see what are your questions? What are your thoughts? Let me see if I can bring up the chat there and see if we have any questions coming on. I think I've gone to the right place up at the top there. So any questions that we have coming in from the chat, or have I just stunned you all into silence? Or you're sat there eating your lunch, busy munching away on your sandwiches whilst I'm talking away to you about being more curious, which, like I say, I think is a very important thing to do. Okay, I'm just having a look and I can't see any questions
So
coming through.
no questions yet. Oh, great session. Yeah, it was a great session. If somebody wants to ask a
Thank you.
question, I can unmute you. So if you just raise your virtual hand and then I can unmute you if it's easier to verbally ask your question.
I don't think I've ever got to the session with no questions, so that would be a first. I would be quite impressed. But again, if anybody had any questions, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to send me a message on there, a DM, that's absolutely fine. I can talk to you on there. That's no worries at all. No, nothing coming through. That is a first, I think, for a lunchtime webinar that I've been involved in or I've hosted. So anybody feeling brave and want to put their hand up at all? No hands going up either. Goodness
We've
me.
just had one in the chat saying, how do we
Okay.
raise the profile of HS when the focus is on clinical safety?
Yes, so raising the profile again, it comes down to that message, doesn't it, of what's coming from the top. And again, it depends what is going on within the business and the organization as well. You don't want to get to a place where you have an incident or you have an accident, and that's what drives an investigation or that's what drives a change. You want to be in a position where you've got people that do acknowledge that we do need to change. Having a look at what is being reported. So as I mentioned, if we're reporting up dashboards to the board and they're only seeing that there's no issues, there's no problems, that's not going to get us very far at all. That's not being made visible. So it's a bit of it's two-way, really, isn't it? Because you need the board to show interest so that people are willing to share things. But if they don't know that there's an issue in the first place to actually dive down, that can be quite a problem. So I think where the focus is on the clinical safety, that is rightly incredibly important, rightly so. But have a look at are you getting near misses through? Are you getting safety concerns through? If you are, report them, shout about them, and say that we do have all these things that are going on that we do need to focus on and treat near miss reporting, treat those safety concerns as you would an accident or an incident because they very nearly could have been perhaps. But if you follow it through in the same way as you would an accident or an incident investigation, and your findings come out that actually this was caused by pressure, this was caused by stress, this was caused by the management of the system, then that's another way to raise that and flag that up. But definitely treat your near misses and your safety concerns and do it as an accident investigation as well if you feel that would help. But it's making sure the reporting goes up, I think, is one of the key way to make management aware. Because as we've seen as we've gone through, if things aren't being reported, they're blind to it. They should be showing awareness, but they might need that nudge in the right direction to show that awareness on occasion.
Great, thanks, Heather. We've had another question from Alan. How do you change the shift in culture to a long-standing business when all the focus is on production? Interesting question.
It's an interesting question. And again, it comes back to getting your leadership involved and out on the floor. So I did say, didn't I, that the safety matrix, maturity matrix, and the HC climate tool, they can be quite useful if you've got a slightly resistant board or a senior leadership team who think that the safety culture is amazing, especially if you show them, this is where we are on the ladder. So, and there's different color codes, and it's very rare to be blue at the top. But if you show them that there's a process to work through and a ladder to get to, then that can help having that visibility. But I think the more you get the leadership out and about, set it as an objective. So get them on the shop floor as an objective. So I've got one we work with, I've seen it in a couple of organizations and I've introduced it in another organization the other year where the directors, they all have an objective to go out on the shop floor twice a year. It doesn't see, and that's not a great lot of time, is it, for a person to go out and spend half an hour twice a year and just have a conversation with somebody doing the work and ask questions. Now, I've seen it done in different ways in different organizations. The best way is to actually, because managers and everybody loves a process, to have a question set, to even give them not like big formal long question set, but to actually go out and say, right, I'm going to talk to this person on this machine over here, and I'm going to say to them, okay, how's your day going? Okay, what's the biggest risk you see? What's your biggest problem? And then not just leave it there, but actually put in their diary when they go back to the office and say, right, I need to chase up and see if Phil has had that fixed in a week's time. And that's just going to show the visibility. But there's always a bit of resistance the first time round with managers and directors doing that because it's out of their comfort zone. But once they've done it more than a couple of times, they start to get that feedback and they start to get that confidence from actually going out and having those conversations because they can see they have an impact. But it is to make it more long-standing, it's having that involvement, it's having that getting them involved and getting them out there and getting them seen that actually builds their confidence and makes it more long-standing. There are organizations I've worked with where it has taken a serious incident to get the leadership team involved, and that's not a great place to be. But when they are involved, it is a great place to be. There are some leaders who, like I say, do make it an objective of the directors to go out and make an effort to do that, like that twice a year thing. And the more, and I've seen other directors as well that have made other CEOs and MDs that have actually made it a requirement for each director to feed in on the topic of safety. So not just the health and safety manager or whoever's, the health and safety coordinator, but the actual director, the actual manager of that division, of that business, of that area to go feed in as part of their monthly report to the board on a health and safety topic. And again, the more they get involved and the more they're talking about it, the more that confidence builds, and nobody wants to step back from that. No one wants that shift backwards. So, and then it also becomes, if they haven't done it, not shamed, but it would be raised, why haven't you reported in this month? So it's just changing that mindset, I think, of again, leadership of the senior leadership teams.
Thank
Okay.
you, Heather. We've just got one more question. I don't know whether it's easier for you to read it, actually. If you click on the Q&A, it might be easier for you to read it because it's
I
quite a
was
long one.
just, okay, hang on. Let me get my head around Zoom again. Sorry. This one's at the bottom, isn't it? Q&A.
No, Q&A will be at the top.
Is it? It
Yeah.
changes, doesn't it, when you're
If you
presenting?
can't, let me read it for you. That'll be
Okay, because
easier.
I
So
can't see it.
I'll try and make good sense of this long question. So, visibility is key. I started to implement a program for all senior management to visit a different workplace area every month.
Yeah,
This was after a site manager told me they have never met the senior leadership team. This
yeah.
was shut down by the CEO because he didn't see the benefit in taking his SLT away from head office. It had a negative effect on the workplace. How would you work around this?
That is horrendous, but it is common as well because it can be that one person that just makes that decision for the whole leadership team, can't it? That then just impacts the whole business because they don't get to see anybody. Um, when I have worked with CEOs that are that resistant or MDs that are that resistant, and I hate doing it because I don't think safety shouldn't be, it should just be every day how we do things. Again, preaching culture. It should be how we do things every day. But there are instances where, and I don't, I even say to the team, don't go preaching health and safety legislation. But you have to make them aware of their responsibility and of their duties. And to do that, they need a team around them to help them manage their duty to be responsible for the safety of everybody in the workplace. I've used case studies, I've used examples of trials and the punishments that have been inflicted. And it's not a nice place to be. It's not nice when you're having to say, actually, this is, you shouldn't feel like you're in a position where you have to preach to somebody what their responsibility is. If they're a CEO or an MD, they should know what their responsibilities are to their workforce. But it could be that you do just need to be blunt. So, there have been times where I've had to be blunt. Another really good way of getting management teams on board as well is, and again, it's convincing them again a little bit, but if there's ever a mock trial in the area, or you can get an organization in to do a mock trial within your business, that pretty much sharpens the focus of a lot of senior leaders as well. Because again, it just brings it to life, it makes it real. So it's not a nice position to be in. I totally understand that. And when it is down to that one resistant person, it can be infuriating. And I have come up against it often. And it is just a case of, like I say, being blunt, try and use examples, try and use situations, and hopefully that might assist in some way.
That's great. Thank you so much, Heather. I think that's all the questions now. So, do you have any closing comments for today's audience?
I think, as I've said, as we've been going through, it really is just about curiosity. It's about asking the questions. It's about being visible. And yes, as I've said, posters, campaigns, they're great. They have their place. But you do need the leadership team, you do need the board to be on your side, to understand that they are the ones driving the culture, they are the ones driving the message.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Great presentation today. You packed a lot into such a short amount of time.
Thank you.
So thank you for everyone for attending today, and we hope to see you at the next branch webinar.
Thank you very
Th-
much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.